All right, me, a Giga Chad Raider, able to deck myself out in 434 item level loot. You, a Scrub Mythic Plus player, the best loot you get, 427 item level from the Great Vault. We are not the same, Dratnos.
I don't know, man. I have bad news. I think the only boss you're going to be killing is actually dropping lower item level stuff than it did last expansion.
Wait, what do you mean?
The first boss's item level is like nerfed.
Okay. Well,
But yeah,
it is what it is.
so that's the sort of biggest thing we're going to start with here is this eye level variableness in Vault of the Incarnate. So rather than just 2 item levels, which Shadowlands raids had, right? Shadowlands raids had the last 2 bosses or 3 bosses being higher eye level. Vault of the Incarnate's boss 1 is like slightly nerfed eye level compared to now, we think. Bosses 2 through 4 are like the same that most bosses were in Shadowlands, and then bosses 5 and 6 are an eye level bump, and bosses 7 and 8 are another eye level bump. So 4 different eye level like tiers within the same raid.
Oh, look at this eye level chart. I feel like this kind of explains it best. Where this is a massive delta. 10 item levels from top to bottom in just Mythic raid, and same with heroic and same with normal. 10 item levels from the first boss to the last is really, really high. Even going from 427 to 434 or 401 to 408, like these are pretty massive jumps.
So we have 7 right now, right? 7 is the difference between Stone Legion General's loot and Sludgefist loot.
Mm-hmm. But at the same point, it's like this does feel kind of weird that the first. I mean, does this allow them to make the first boss of Mythic even easier? I guess.
I don't think it necessarily allows them to. It's more like from their perspective, it lets it be properly rewarding, which is, I guess, less rewarding. My take on this though is kind of mixed. Like, I think that to some extent it kind of does make sense that, like, sure, easier bosses should drop worse loot and harder bosses should drop better loot. But on the other hand, it's like, oh, if you look at it later and it's like, well, I'm playing a elemental shaman, and it just turns out that the caster weapon for elemental shamans, it happens to come from like boss 2 or boss 1.
Yeah,
right?
sure.
And then like the male loot happens to be distributed such that there's, the 2 shoulders come from bosses 1 and boss 4, right? And then it's like, oh, well, the leather wearers are able to get their loot from boss 7 and boss 6, right? And so just like you look at like full endgame bis between different specs and they being quite different is something that I am a little bit worried about. And I have been I've hated it whenever it's been true that, like, some classes are wearing 304 weapons and some are wearing 311s this time around. And I think that making it so that I don't see this as being that different from current, because like the 7 eye levels we have now, there's 7 eye levels still in Vault of the Incarnate. Is just like the first boss is a little bit nerfed than that, but it's 7 eye levels between boss 2 and boss 8.
It says 10, but it's like this is like 7. So
it's 7 except for the first boss loot, bring it to 10.
I think the big thing is the Mythic Plus speculated table. That is what I saw, and I was like, oh my goodness. It's important to note that this is speculated and it's extrapolated based on Shadowlands Season 4. And like Blizzard hasn't said anything on this. We haven't even seen it in the beta. It's not completely confirmed. But this is like the speculated loot table where you were getting the equivalent of 427, which is the second tier out of the Great Vault, just from Mythic. And like at the end of the day, we don't know what Valor upgrades are going to look like. We don't know what like fully upgraded into dungeon rewards are necessarily going to look like, but it's probably going to be somewhere in this 421 range ish.
Yeah, so again, it's 421 would be again the extrapolation. It is worth noting this is literally based on nothing from Dragonflight, right? It is only if they kept the same numbers from Shadowlands going forward, which in both BFA and Shadowlands that wasn't true. So it's likely that there might be some tweaks to this, but if there's not, then yeah, I mean, it's basically the same phenomenon we have right now where, out of Sepulchre, there's 3 bosses, and out of the other raids, there's 2 that are 7 eye levels better than Great Vault loot from M+, right? Like 4 or 311 versus 304, except instead of there being, a small percentage at the end of the raid, it's the full second half of the raid that is better than M+ loot.
The literal first tweet I saw whenever I clicked on this was "Rip Mythic Plus." Like, and I feel like if you're an M+ only player, I mean, now more than ever, I feel like M+ players have felt like in-game content for M+ is way more legitimate, and they should be getting I don't even know if they necessarily believe like full BIS, but they think that they should be getting at least very close to the equivalent item level. They don't enjoy being able to. They don't enjoy playing 3 to 6 item levels behind, just depending on what they get. In addition to that, they only get these high value pieces, these 427s from the Great Vault, where they're outside of that kind of stacked up on Valor, and so they're playing somewhere in the order of like around 10% damage down off of people who have raid gear.
Yeah, the Rip M plus take is one that I'd be a little hesitant around because, again, completely unconfirmed what the rewards from M plus are. And second, right now you can get items in every single slot that are 7 eye levels better than M plus, whereas in Vault of the Incarnates, like, that will be less true, right? Like the faded, this will be better than the faded season, at least in terms of like how much lower eye levels are the M plus players than the raid players, because in the faded season there's 7 full bosses that are dropping at 7 higher, whereas there's only going to be 2 that are 7 higher and 2 that are 4 higher in Vault of the Incarnates. So like only half of your gear can come from those bosses realistically, probably.
Yeah, but it's at the same point. I mean, if this does come to fruition, this feels like another kind of stab at Mythic Plus players. That's, I would say, a bit unnecessary overall. It's like, is this really needed for what Mythic Plus players are gearing?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if they don't say anything more about M plus loot, it doesn't mean that it's going to be worse. It means it'll be like about the same for M plus as it was in season 3, and a little better than it is in season 4, where obviously in season 4 there's the again, you can just be fully 311 in every slot because of how many bosses there are that drop 311s.
So some people may look at this and be like, oh my god, I'm not going to be able to trade anything from raid. And because in past seasons, with how personal loot had worked previously, this would be the case. Whereas like boss 1, you wouldn't be able to trade that unless you had similar slot from boss 2 through 8, and same with like you wouldn't be able to trade loot from bosses 2 through 4 unless you had it on 5 and 6 or stuff like that. However, that's going to be no longer the case in Dragonflight. They, in an interview with Max, Ian Hezekosis was talking about and basically all but confirmed the return of group loot in some fashion. We don't know what it's going to look like yet, but it sounded like group loot, which is that need before greed or pass like icon thing, will show up, and then if one person hits need on all of it, then they can just distribute the loot as they want.
Right. So in a group where everybody is consenting to it, you can just have the loot be assigned to whoever you want, but you can't be forced into that in the same way that you could with Master Looter, where you will always have the option to press need and roll on an item you might need. So you can't get that like yoinked from you by the rule system. So that being said, for raid groups, like for guild groups like yours or mine, it is functionally like that is what we will be doing, right? Is like we will all be passing and there will be a master leader that gets the item and then distributes it.
So with that being the case, I actually think that the system becomes a lot more interesting now with the item level bump between the first and then the second through fourth and then fifth through sixth boss. I think that this is a really interesting decision. I wonder how it's going to end up feeling to play.
Yeah, I will say my initial reaction to this was like, oh no, that's going to be really awful for trading, right? Because like the worst part about trading was when you had something that was like 3 item levels lower, and so you couldn't trade the next piece.
Yep.
But that's not going to be true because there's no trading eligibility stuff here. So that's nice at least.
Do you think this is exciting for you? Because I think for me, it's like, this is more or less the same. As long as I don't feel like people are getting like the situation where you brought up earlier where people were getting snubbed on like their loot. That's happened a couple of times. I remember in Nyalotha, there was like a caster weapon that came off of
Drestagath.
It was the one that was off of Carapace of Nazoth.
Yeah.
And it was at like a massive item level advantage over the other caster weapons.
One.
Yeah. It was I think a lot of other people ended up using the void ritual mace.
Ellie Shamans and Mistweavers like couldn't wear the weapon type on the last boss or something, so they were just using like an axe from Drestagath or something.
Well, same with like, because it was a wand, and so like druids and paladins couldn't use it too, and so like you ended up with the two-hander void ritual from Soccer Boss as well. Like there was a lot going on with that, and assuming that we're not in a similar situation where the loot tables are pretty lopsided for a couple of classes, it should more or less be fine, I think.
Yeah, I think I would still prefer if just all mythic raid loot was the same level and all heroic raid loot was the same eye level, but I think I'm down for this kind of experimentation. I would really love it to come with a system to just let you upgrade the items to 434, like from whichever boss they dropped. letting you drop even maybe from the later bosses like upgrade tokens that let you bring it all the way up to 434.
That would end up like even further creating a massive disparity.
I wouldn't mind there being that for M+ items as well.
Yeah,
from, like,
okay. I think that
or whatever.
That's pretty valid. I think that I hope that they kind of change functionally how like the Great Vault and then like loot upgrading works, especially like we talked about last week with the dinar system and then like the token upgrades. I think that there's definitely something there where Blizzard has a lot of room for experimentation and changing of functionally how that loot works. I think that it would actually be nice to, like you said, have the ability to be able to upgrade these 427s into 434s, or upgrade these 427s into 434s or something like that, right?
Yeah, I think something like that would make me just pretty pure upside on the system.
Yeah.
But without that, I'm still probably fine with it.
I think it's fine.
My gut reaction is still like, to it. You know, it's something I'm worried about rather than like excited about.
All right. The other stuff. Okay, so we have a couple other things that we want to talk about this week that was just kind of newsworthy stuff. More of it's mostly related to Dragonflight Beta. Atropic Poison. We had a video on this a while ago whenever we were talking about class buffs just in general. It's the Rogue Aura Mastery Poison. It got added to the 2 other Rogue specs. Initially, it was only available for Assassination, so we kind of joked and we're like, oh yeah, Outlaw and Sub looking like they have absolutely nothing. Now, that's no longer the case. And,
Outlaw has the party CDR thing still.
It's not a raid buff. It's like
yeah.
You would have to have one Assassination Rogue, and now you just have to have one Rogue.
Right, yeah. Rogue now basically has a raid buff that is a damage reduction. Yeah.
You want to hit the Warrior Mask Grip thing that was pretty hotly contested for a little bit?
Yeah. So it's like Heroic Leap now grips in 5 random targets to you when
it was
leap.
5, now it's 4.
Okay, little nerf there. And there's also going to be cooldown increases to Heroic Leap to compensate or something I've heard about as well, potentially.
Yep, 45 seconds.
Yeah, I saw, I think, a blue post saying they were maybe looking at adding more to it. Either way, this is something where it's like, if I was a warrior, I would not be happy about this, and if I was not a warrior, I would also not be happy. Like if I was competing with warriors for a raid spot, because like, man, if you're gonna make my Heroic Leap like longer, something I can't use for movement anymore, but you're gonna increase like the warrior raid utility package with this kind of thing, it's like you know, I feel like there's no winners in this exchange. I feel like it's just pain.
Yeah, I think
that makes warrior like a more mandatory raid spot, which it already had. One is already mandatory, but like, it makes it even more so. And then it's like pain to play because now your Heroic Leap isn't a movement button that you get to save for on a lot of fights. Now it's going to be like you have to press this on this ad spawn or whatever.
It's just so awkward because I feel like okay, so whenever I looked at this, I immediately thought of Mythic Plus. Warrior, as it currently stands, doesn't have shit for Mythic Plus, by the way.
No, Warrior needs more M+ utility, but like 4 targets grip?
Well, because
I mean,
part of it's like there's Shockwave is a capstone trait in the Warrior class tree as well.
I think that's being looked at, or maybe already has, but yeah.
Okay, so previously Shockwave was a capstone in the Warrior class tree. They have Fear, they have Stormbolt, and then what? Like actually, and then what for Mythic Plus utility?
Well,
and so whenever I first looked at this, I was like, oh, this is nice. They actually need this for Mythic Plus. But then I sat there and thought about it, and I was like, okay, so now they have Battle Shout, Rallying Cry, and then just like started thinking about their raid utility suite, and I was like, oh, so they're just completely boxing out Death Knight.
Yeah, and I mean the like an M+, the uncapped nature of Mask Grip or whatever is really big for it, but Mask Grip is not a Death Knight wide thing. It's a Blood Death Knight only thing, right?
Yes.
And then for M+, like a 4 target Mask Grip on your Heroic Leap is not the times where you need Mask Grip in M+, it's not about 4 targets, right? It's about 7, 9, something like that. Like that. It's 4, especially 4 random, not 4 closest is
it says
is really rough for it.
It says random, but I suspect that this means closest.
If it's closest, it'll be at least somewhat more controllable, but still, it's like this. I believe this was a bad news for warriors and for non-warriors. I do think warrior does need more M+ utility. Yes, I'm all for that. But like to me, this is like another in that list of like Battle Shout, Rallying Cry, where it's like, okay, this might be a little bit useful in M+, but it's like a lot useful in raid, and they need the budget to go more towards M+.
Okay, and so the last piece of news, I mean, all of this is going to be linked down in the description. It's like all Wowhead stuff. I would recommend going and checking it out, reading it for yourself as well. Binding Shot getting nerfed. Well, actually, it had already been nerfed. and Blizzard has confirmed in a blue post that the nerf is intentional and they want it to have consistency with other root effects. And so basically what they did is they made Binding Shot a similar to Mass Entanglement or Frost Nova break on damage. And so basically what they said is the change to Binding Shot's root to break from damage is intentional. There's some history with this ability. As many probably remember, it was briefly changed to break from damage in Shadowlands, but its change was reverted. I'm going to be honest. They say that this does reduce the power of Binding Shot. Yes, with the amount of damage, with the amount of changes coming in Dragonflight and options for new control abilities such as Scatter Shot and High Explosive Trap being available, we feel this is an appropriate time to make this change. I hard disagree. So here's the deal with Hunter and Mythic Plus. Hunter and Mythic Plus doesn't really have very much in general, especially whenever you start to compare it to other classes. Hunter normally ends up getting boxed out pretty heavy in the utility department by Rogue. Because of like how Tricks works, Freezing Trap, and like stuff like that. Tricks versus MD, Freezing Trap versus Blind, and just generally Rogue being Rogue. It's not exactly fair to compare them all the time, but this is something that Hunter had always brought fully unique utility, where this Binding Shot did not break on damage, and so it was really great for a lot of situations just in general. Did it kind of make it mandatory in Mythic Plus? Yeah, I guess, but at the same point, it was this unique thing that it felt really good to press and felt really good to have in your group. Now, what it is just almost like it's mass root, I guess, but it's bad mass root because you're not going to have 100% uptime on Binding Shot.
Yeah, I mean, Binding Shot is something like if it's no better than Mass Root or Frost Nova, but it requires you to like do all of this work to actually proc it, it's hard to imagine it seeing much use. I would rather see a duration nerf on how long the root is. Than see this for sure. I don't think Binding Shot has ever been mandatory for M+ or anything like that. It's like people are using Binding Shot now because Hunter's good, but it's not like I've been turbo insane or required for anything. But it is functionally like a 8-second stun if you're using it right, which is kind of crazy. And it is one of those things where it's like this thing was hard to use and good groups were using it, and it was like being really OP in those groups.
I'm just surprised that they say it's like there's some history with this ability, as many probably remember. It used to be a stun, didn't it? I'm not just making that up. Like here,
I don't remember that.
I pulled up the spell data on it. It used to be a stun back in Legion, and then whenever they nerfed AoE stuns across the board, they changed Binding Shot to this root that it currently is. And so I'm surprised that they're saying this. Oh yeah, there's some history with this ability, and so we're changing it to like a really bad root. Like it's just like one of those things that I feel. Okay, so Hunter has Feign Death, which I would argue is like really, really cool niche utility for Mythic Plus. But then beyond that, Hunter doesn't bring a lot else. And I felt like this put them in a spot where it's like, is this mandatory? No. Are they going to get brought if they just do high damage? Yes. I mean, they're a DPS. Like if they do the most damage, they're going to get brought. Like, let's not get it twisted here. But at the same point, this is really nice to have, especially on specific weeks like Necrotic weeks and just for very specific packs as well that you would like to kite. I liked Binding Shot. I like playing with Binding Shot. I thought it was cool. I'm kind of sad to see it get changed.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically turning into like worse Frost Nova. Like if it's going to break on damage, it is just like worse Master, right? It's like,
yes,
because this thing it's hard to set up and trigger it.
It's so good versus like fleeing mobs and stuff too right now.
Yeah, I feel like, okay, yeah, I feel like with Binding, it's like they should either just make it a 6 or 4 second route instead of 8, but leave the doesn't break on damage functionality.
Yeah.
Or make that like an easy talent for it, like a one point below Binding Shot talent to if you still want the longer duration for PvP or something. I don't know. I don't know anything about PvP, but
it's actually a magic dispel in PvP, so you don't it doesn't matter.
Either do that or just like, I don't know, let it make it like reduce the movement speed coming out of it or something. Because I do just feel like it's actually just gonna be like a button that is bad and not pressed, because it's like, why would I jump through all these hoops to trigger, a route that just goes away instantly?
It's actually not that easy to trigger in a lot of situations too.
Exactly. Like so like that payoff was worth because it was 8. I mean, it was really powerful at 8 seconds. I think you would still do it for 6 or 4 seconds, maybe the 4 seconds.
Yeah.
But like you wouldn't do it for 8 seconds of route that breaks on damage, right? You would just, I mean, you would throw a Binding in the same places that you throw a Mass route now, but if you're going to do that, maybe make it a 60 second
or like Like, because previously you would throw a binding the same point, so you drop an Ursul's Vortex, which is a good ability.
Yeah, like, I mean, if you want it to break on damage, maybe increase its duration so that it can actually be used on like the Globgrog Spines and Slimes and Plaguefall, right? Like actually using it as like a long-term route. Give it that 30-second route that Mass Route has if it's going to break on damage,
I guess.
But I feel like it being 8 seconds breaks on damage, hard to set up, it's just like they need to give on one of those things for this to be a button that anybody presses outside of very niche situations.
Okay, so last couple things, I don't want this to go too much longer, that got changed that were kind of notable. Prot Warrior got Skull Banner.
Yeah, arms. It started out just being for one of the DPS specs, and now all 3 warrior specs have it, which, just like the Atrophic Poison, I think it is much better for a class to have a powerful utility than for a spec to have it. I think I think Mass Grip as well is something where they should look at adding that for Frost and Unholy. Like these sorts of effects are so polarizing and so powerful that when one spec has it and the others don't, it actually does a huge amount of damage for those other specs ever seeing play.
And then Warlock Interrupt got changed back to Fell Hunter. I actually kind of agreed with like the blue posts. I don't have it pulled up here, but basically the TLDR is like, we wanted to remove it off of Fell Hunter because we felt like people were using Fell Hunter too much and we wanted it to just be the Purge, but then people complained, and so we thought that it was fine to basically the TLDR was like, it's fine to stay on Fell Hunter, it doesn't really matter. And that's kind of my thoughts on it too. There are people on both ends where they wanted it on your player. There are some people that wanted it on your Fell Hunter. It's probably fine, but it got reverted back to being on the pet.
Yeah, I am not a strong opinion haver on this one. I will say it was funny. It was a funny Wowhead post to read because the comments were split between people that were sure it was going to be a great change and that everybody would all agree that, and then people that were sure that it was a horrible change and that everybody would agree with that.
Yeah.
Which is always funny.
I thought that was the funniest part for me personally. I haven't played Warlock a ton lately, but I've been playing it a bit recently. I like interrupting on Fell Hunter. It's off the GCD. It's kind of chill. The annoying part, managing my pets, having to swap pets if I ever really want to do anything else because I always have to have my Fell Hunter out.
Yeah, I can definitely see both sides. Like, I do like the idea of
it makes sense.
Not being a pet that's like 95% use or more in M+, but I don't know. And end of the day, I defer to the Warlocks on this.
Yeah, it's fine. It's honestly okay. All right. I think that's going to be it for us today. Any final words?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Did you know that the people actually liked our outro last week?
What did we do last week?
The one where I baited you and said that I forgot to record.
Oh my god, you kept that in?
Yeah, I kept that in. All right, I'm keeping this in too. Goodbye.